And that resonated with a lot of people because I think that is a common thing, especially with secondary infertility, is it's very blindsiding. So you're picturing certain things and like even tiny little things like that, not using a double stroller, just, yeah, make you stop and make you think. And so that resonated with a lot of people. And I'm not glad that a lot of people feel that, but I am glad that I was able to put words to it.
Hello and welcome to the And Both podcast. Here we are going to hear from moms and those in motherhood that are doing the thing that works for them. They are honoring themselves alongside the all-encompassing role and level of expectation that is motherhood. And we are going to hear from as many different people as possible in their own experience. So you can find people to relate to. You can hear stories that will make you laugh, make you cry, all of the above, and that we will come together as a community to support one another in a way that is holistic and honoring of the woman and the mother as a whole. All right. Hello and welcome back to the And Both podcast. Today I am joined by the wonderful Allie Karagozian, and I did just rehearse the name thing because last time I talked about this, but she has many special things to share today. That's not to put the pressure on, but I'm just really excited. She's an OT. She is the owner of Holding Both, which we're going to talk about, and all of the things that follow that. So I would love for you to, well, first of all, welcome. Hello. Hi.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I get going and get excited and I'm like, so now we're going to do this. And that's just really not the plan. So anyways, welcome. And I would love for you to tell people a little bit about you and Holding Both and all of that. And we'll just sort of go from there.
Well, thank you again for having me. My name is Allie Karagozian. I am a mom of two young boys. My oldest is going to be 5 in January, and my youngest is going to be 2 next week. I am an occupational therapist and have been one since the end of 2015. And as Dr. Blackington has said in her prior episodes, the evolution of the career has changed for her since she's become a mom, as with me. So I'm excited to share that with you and just how things have changed in terms of what OT looks like for me now versus what it did before I had my children. Right now, I work in an acute care setting per diem, and I own a business. I started Holding Both to support moms through secondary infertility. I started that in 2022. So we'll be going into that more, but I'm very excited to talk about that.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. So acute care. So you're like running up and down in all different directions. So that's a serious downshift or a serious change of pace, like to go from, I mean, and I only say this because I know this is like everything is fast. Everything's fast. People come in fast. People go through the process fast. People leave fast. And it's like, everything is sort of going, but the Holding Both is really about slowing down and stopping and really just focusing on this thing that, like, I think a lot of times people end up trying to speed through. It's like, it's a whole different mindset and a whole different pace. Like, so how does that work for you?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't think I've ever thought about it in that context, but that's very true. In the traditional OT settings, I've worked in acute care, inpatient rehab, and mental health, and those in and of themselves are a lot different.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of acute care, yes, things are moving very fast. We see people maybe once or twice before they move on to their next setting. Whereas with Holding Both, when I'm working with the women who are going through infertility, and motherhood at the same time, they don't know how long their journeys are going to be, and they don't know. It is similar in the regard where you don't know what the outcome is going to be in the acute care setting either. But yes, with Holding Both and women going through infertility, there's a lot of waiting. A lot of hurry up and wait is what people in the infertility community often say, and it's not fast. So it's a lot more focus on mental health and caring for yourself, like day by day, taking it one day at a time, and also making sure that you're engaging in your motherhood with your child that you have now and what that looks like, and like addressing more mental health, like feelings of not feeling guilt for wanting another child, and engaging with your other child that you have now.
Yeah.
A lot of looking at what we call IADLs, so we can talk about that later too,
Mm.
the instrumental
My love
activities of daily
language.
living. So yeah, it's a lot different. It's two very different things. So I'm glad that you asked that question, and I hope that that answers the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, I think that that's like I think sometimes what we end up talking about or what we end up like searching out is the answer to like most of these things start, right? Like we have our own thing, whatever that is, and it's like maybe it is the content, or maybe it is the context, maybe it's the pace. And it's like whoa, like how do we just stop this? Like for me, everything was moving at this like rapid pace, and I was like I was feeling very untethered because there was nothing to tether to. And it was like, all right, we have to stop here. And like I mean, I will maybe so nonchalantly turn this into a pro OT podcast, because as many OTs as I can get on here as possible, because it's just this weird like it's almost like when you go through the process, because we're so task analysis oriented and we're so granular, that you become this like when you take that lens and you put it into your own life, or you put it into this group that you see, you're like, I can't unsee that. You know what I mean? It's like the princess and the pea. Like I can't unsee this thing that's going on, and I know how to help, and I know like you have a background in mental health, you have a background in OT, you have a background as a mom. It's like, okay, well, I have all these tools. I can't just like walk on by. Like I have to stop and help these people.
Definitely. I mean, I saw when I was going through secondary infertility myself, and I was trying to engage with my son and not feel like I was taking anything away from him. When I was trying to work, I was working full time at the time during the
Oh
pandemic,
wow.
and I was trying to just be engaged in my life and keep my home running. That's when I saw that there was just this huge need for moms who were going through infertility, because a lot of the support for infertility, and I do think it's changing as an aside, but a lot of the support out there for infertility is for people who aren't moms yet.
Yeah.
So there is a message that I was finding, and maybe it was some projecting onto myself or just putting pressure on myself, but the message I was finding of be grateful for what you have, and
Mm-hmm.
then move along. And of course, I was grateful for my son, but I was
Yeah.
also realizing that my IADLs, my instrumental activities of daily living, were so disrupted. It was like going through infertility and trying to parent at the same time was just messing up all my IADLs, my finances,
Yeah.
the way I kept my house, all that. So
Yeah, and then you also have the idea of like it's like that like the little lady in the grocery store, right? Like when your kid is losing their mind and you're like, I just want to get in the car, I just want to go home, like I'm all done. I would like to go to bed now, like whatever. And then the little like elderly person comes up and they're like, every day is a gift, or like just enjoy
yeah,
this moment. And you're like, I don't have to enjoy this one to be doing a good job. Like
right.
this particular one I'd like to not have to like do that for, and like that doesn't make me ungrateful. It just means
Yeah,
that like I am a human who is humaning in a world, and oftentimes in a role where the human part is not so supported or front and center. So I love
absolutely.
what you're doing.
Thank you so much. And I loved when I saw your name pop up, the and both, I just knew, well, and the fact that you're an occupational therapist, I just knew that there's a lot of overlap in values in terms of the feelings aren't mutually exclusive. And that's what
Yeah.
I base holding both on, is the message that you can engage and feel the joy of motherhood and hold the yearning and pain that comes with infertilities together.
Hmm.
So just because you want to have another child or children doesn't mean that you're not enjoying and engaging in the joy and the challenges of motherhood, that you are in right now. So
Yeah.
it's been really,
Yeah.
it's been really awesome.
I think, yeah, I think it's incredible. And I think too, like maybe I don't know. I think sometimes what happens in things like, I mean, the pandemic is kind of this like great highlighter of things, but like, do you think that if there was no pandemic where like the amount of isolation and the amount of like, like you get cut off from being able to like attend a lot of groups or to reach out for one-on-one support because all those resources were suddenly like, diverted in areas where they needed to go. It's not like everyone just decided to go to Hawaii, but like,
Yeah.
all of those resources get cut off, but you still have these issues. Like, do you think that we'd still be going on the way in talking about secondary infertility if we didn't have something so crushing and isolating like a pandemic?
I think it would be different for sure. I think about the pandemic a lot, because I really was on the front lines, and it was during a time in my life it was profoundly hard. It was when I was going through infertility and a semi-new mom. I mean, my son was 2 or just about 2. So it was interesting too to see like pandemic parenting, even though I didn't have like a lot of time before the pandemic, like 2 years
Yeah.
before, but pandemic non-pandemic parenting versus like being thrust into being isolated with my toddler was definitely interesting, and I think that that maybe changed some conversations. And I don't want to go too much off on a tangent here, so reel me back in. But yeah, I think the pandemic changed a lot, and I think it changed a lot in terms of maybe getting more virtual resources out to people that may not have been available before. So like
Yeah.
Zoom connections and stuff like that. So I think maybe in some ways it was, well, not maybe, definitely in some ways it was more challenging in the infertility community to be like navigating appointments and doing all this stuff, with the pandemic because you weren't able to bring your partner,
Yeah.
um, and that kind of thing. But then the virtual resources, I think, increased. So two different things, but
Yeah. Yin and yang. I think too, like, I feel like that, especially on the negative side of the pandemic, it's like, I feel like there were so many times in there where people were like, well, at least I'm not like, at least I don't have COVID, prior to like medicine and technology and therapy and all of that stuff. Like, like there's that idea of like relative trauma or like relative suffering. It's like, you know, I feel maybe when the message is like, you have a child, you're going through this process, and it's like, is it the like is it like people not being able to feel like, oh my god, this is awful, and like experiencing all of that, because then you get that, like you were talking about, like, well, at least like I have my son, and at least I don't have COVID, and at least and it just like makes everything smaller, but you're creating a space for people to not make everything smaller relative to everything else. Like you've created
yeah,
the space where people are like, no, this sucks, like
yeah,
big picture sucks, and in part of my life. So it's, yeah, like,
yeah.
yeah.
Definitely. I think something that I did do was I think I did a really nice job for myself, and I like look back at myself with compassion during that time because it was really hard. Of not like at leasting. I think I was really acutely
Yes.
aware in the moment that like what I was going through really sucked, like terrible.
Yeah.
And I think back to November 2020, and I do think that that was one of the lowest points, but I think it was one of the points that really defined and like is the reason why I created Holding Both.
Yeah.
It was a point where I felt like the pandemic, like a couple months prior, I was like, maybe this is going to ebb and flow and be done. And then November 2020 rolled around, and it just was like very clear that it wasn't ending
Yeah.
anytime soon. I had been doing fertility treatments in my third one. I've been doing IUIs, which are a little bit more conservative than IVF, but still involved. In my
Yeah.
third one I had had, and it ended in a miscarriage. And it was like, working as an essential worker and being told, okay, now it's time to consider IVF. And it was just like so many shifts at once. And I also knew that I'd be taking all these medications for IVF, and at the very end, right before my egg retrieval, I was going to have to take a COVID test. And if it was positive, I was going to not be able to do IVF. And so that
Jesus.
just felt very high stakes working on the front lines. And so
Yeah.
I knew in November of 2020, that's when I just decided that if I ever get to the other side, no matter what that looks like, because I also knew that I might not have a second child. I was really, really hoping I was. But I told myself whenever I get to the other side, whether that be a second child or deciding an alternative path, I'm going to do something to give back, and I'm going to do something to support others, and I'm going to do something to really, really highlight that, like, this sucks, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and I know you as an OT too, it's like as OTs, we see situations that are so, so hard. And I think sometimes I'd come home from work and say, like, think about someone who has a diagnosis where they're not going to be living for much longer, or someone who has a really serious neurological thing going on. And I think that those are the moments where it's easy to at least yourself, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
for sure.
But separating is something I think as OTs we're really good at doing, is just looking at context.
Yeah. I remember I worked in acute rehab most of my clinical time, and so typically the people that are in there are older. It's typically falls or like major surgery or an accident, but there's not that many young people in there. And after my first child was born, I worked with the first like mom who was my age, and I was like not okay. Like I have seen horrific things, and I have worked with people where it's just like you read these charts and you're like, "Oh my god. Oh my god, what is going on?" And I remember like I walked into the room, and it was like this woman was not going to survive, and she and her child was in there. And I was like wrecked, completely wrecked. Like it was all I could do. And like when you do this for so long, there's like a weird dissociative, like it has to be very clinical. You have empathy and you care and you understand that, but you don't have that like deep like feeling in the core. And I remember I left the room and I was just like, not okay. Not okay. Like I've seen awful things, like not okay, because it was so close.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just it's like what why is this stuff happening? Like why is secondary infertility happening? And it's not like the clinical why, it's the like what in the world is
Mm-hmm.
going on
Mm-hmm.
that like these that people are experiencing these things. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just and people need space to talk about those things, because otherwise they get locked into the echo chamber, or they get locked into like, I'm the only one that this is happening to. I'm the only one that's experiencing this. Everyone else is like handling it. Everyone else has this village. Everyone else is getting to the other side of it. So just creating that space is essential. So
Yeah.
thank
Yeah,
you.
I think so. Yeah. And it's interesting too, around the holiday season, is like things that I've heard from women who I'm working with, and myself. I noticed that around the holiday season, that seems to be when social media,
Mm,
um, you start to see a lot of pregnancy announcements. It seems like there's more around the holiday season, and a lot of
yeah.
women have a really hard time with it,
Hmm.
myself included, when I was going through it. And social media is something that for me I always liked, and that's not something I took a break from. I just tried to monitor how I used it and how it made me feel, and check in with myself. But something I hear a lot is, I feel so bad. This should be an exciting time. I can't be happy
Right.
for her right now. And that's another message that I want to put across, is that it doesn't make you any different of a person. It's just you're going through something where you're grieving, and it's really hard to show up and be happy for someone else. And you don't need to be the loudest cheerleader at the moment.
Right.
You can care for yourself.
Right.
And I think with the at least thing, to go back to that for one more moment, is that when people think about infertility, especially from the outside looking in, it's like you think about having a baby on the other side. So this is an exciting thing to be able to go through, and like have the hope of having another baby. But a lot of these women are dealing with some pretty serious diagnoses, like endometriosis, and getting surgeries,
Yeah.
and there's a lot that is there that's really hidden. So I try really hard to stop the at leasts, because
Hmm.
like a lot of this infertility is tied with diagnoses and illnesses that are really difficult in everyday life.
Yeah. And it's all hidden. That's the problem. It's all hidden, is that it's all just like there's so much just figuring it out on your own that people are left to do. But if everyone's just trying to figure it out on their own, like so when you like to go to talk about like so acute care, all of these things, you have to take care of yourself at the end of the day, right? Like you leave work and you're like, that was a day, and how that all works. How do you do that for yourself, knowing that you have with holding both? I almost said and both, sorry. With holding both, knowing that this has been your experience, and it's like, like you're circling back on it when you're working with other people. Like, so how do you take care of you in this?
It feels a lot different with holding both. I think part of it is that even though I have my two children, I am still going through, and I think it's going to be I think it's going to be a lifelong healing process for me.
Hmm.
But I think to some extent, like as I'm creating content or as I'm creating ideas for what we're going to speak about in groups, I find myself reflecting on like pieces of my journey that I might not have thought about in the same capacity at the time.
Hmm.
So I don't feel like I need, let me see how I can articulate this best. I don't feel like I need to like be done with work and then decompress in a way that has nothing to do with holding both, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
that
Like
makes
when
complete
I come
sense.
home from working at a hospital, present and in the past, more so in the past, because it was a lot more difficult to do full time, and to do inpatient rehab, I think was like I really needed
A
buffers at the
drive.
end of the day. Yes, a drive. Yeah. And my son actually went to daycare at my hospital. And so it was like I had
Hmm.
a drive, but like my drive was with him.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really listen to podcasts, or I couldn't really listen to something that decompressed me as much. So,
Hmm.
but anyways, I digress. I don't feel like I needed, or I do not feel like I need like a break where I'm just doing something that is like completely unrelated. To give you an example, like my youngest son is turning 2 this upcoming week. And
Oh,
I
happy
found
birthday.
myself, thank you. I found myself kind of revisiting some emotions that I was having when my other son was about to turn 2 and I was in the thick
Mm,
of infertility. And it feels a lot different, but there's things that have stopped me in my path or on my in my tracks and have made me think. And to me, that's been therapeutic because it's helped me create content for holding both.
yeah.
And it's just helped me take a pause and journal for myself, or do something that like honors my past self. So a couple examples is that like my son is done in his crib, and that's not something that's a lot earlier than my other son was. I don't know. He
Yeah.
just isn't using a crib anymore. He's climbing out.
Hmm.
But taking down the crib. And that was something that was really emotional. I know a lot of people in my community have a really emotional time taking down their crib. A lot of
Hmm.
the women in my community have 3, 4 year olds, and they've kept their cribs up because they think, the baby's coming, and now they're taking them down, acknowledging that, another baby may come, but I'm going to take down my crib. And it's like a very symbolic thing.
Yeah.
And so when I was taking down my crib, I was thinking about all these women. And for me, like it was healing, but it was also just definitely made me think about them and have empathy for them and just think about what they may be feeling. So,
Yeah. Like you're part of something. You're part of
yeah,
something. You're not doing it alone. And you're not.
yeah,
Yeah, I all that all of, so much of the closure piece, like it just, I think it goes across so many different aspects, especially of motherhood. Like I've put this out before, like my kids' clothes is like that's my Achilles heel. Like the baby clothes and things like that. I did not experience secondary infertility, so I don't want to like say that, I'm
No, no,
hopping on
I
the
think,
bandwagon on that.
yeah.
But like the closure piece of it is, it's so hard. So having that piece, and also having that, the secondary infertility, and how that impacts and how that layers into that, is just like, that feels like it could be easily very crushing. Like I cannot, I mean, my son is 3. And he is like in that phase where like they go through like a growth spurt, and you have to like, change out all the clothes, but like he's the last one that will ever wear them. But the difference is I know he's the last one. And
Right.
so it's like, but I've had, as we were growing our family, it was like, will this kid get to wear this again? Or like, will the next baby? And it's just this idea of like everything like wrapping up, like he's got a toddler bed now. He really can go into a regular bed, but I'm like, there's been a crib in my house for 11 years. Like I
Yeah.
remember when I brought this home from the store, and it's just like, there's so many layers and so many emotional pieces that go to it, where like, again, I will sing this from the rooftops, like you're creating the space and the opportunity for people to say, this is happening to me, and other people to say, yeah, me too, this is horrible. And like just bringing it out into the light is everything.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's really important. And I, with you, like what you said, it's a universal experience with moms
Hmm.
to know or not know, but just the baby items and what's attached to the feelings of each item. And
Hmm.
some, they hold more sentimental value than others. Or like you said, having the crib for in your home for so long, it's so significant.
Yeah.
Um, there was actually a reel that I made a couple weeks ago, and I did not realize it would hit home with so many people. Is I we moved in May, so we've been slowly unpacking and
Hmm.
transitioning from living in the city to living in a house. Has been definitely interesting, but lots of shifting around of the baby stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I came across is our double stroller adapters that we never used because our children ended up not being like my
Yeah.
son ended up not or being too big for the stroller by the time that my other son was born. And so we never needed a double stroller, but we had the adapters because when I was pregnant with my first, I knew I wanted another one. And so I registered for the adapters because I thought maybe the models would change and like another
Yeah.
baby would surely be coming shortly after.
Yeah.
Um, and so that to me, when I saw those, that gave me pause because it reminded me, it just reminded me of the control I didn't have in terms of like the spacing of my children.
Hmm.
Um, and that resonated with a lot of people because I think that is a common thing, especially with secondary infertility, is it's very blindsiding. So you're
Yeah.
picturing certain things and like even tiny little things like that, not using a double stroller just yeah make you stop and make you think, and so that resonated with a lot of people, and I'm not glad that a lot of people feel that, but I am glad that I was able to put words to it.
Right. You're holding up a flag for people to find, really. And
Hmm.
I think that's so important. So when you so you do per diem, and you have the group. So outside of taking care of everybody else, what do you do for you? Like how do you take care of you? Because there is this like especially I think when you're a therapist, like there is this fulfillment that you get from helping other people. But
Hmm.
again, that's more giving, even though there is some like kickback in like feeling good and feeling helpful and feeling like you have this skill set, and you can affect change and create community and things like that. But like outside of those things, like for you, like for Allie, what does Allie do for Allie, that
So
that
for me, I love to write. When I first became a mom, I started a blog. It's a small blog, and I haven't written on it recently.
Mhm.
But it's called Home on Thursdays because I worked 4 9s, and Thursdays were my day where I was home with my son.
Yeah.
Um, and so every week I would write a blog post about just my reflections on motherhood, living in a big city, and life in general.
Mm-hmm.
And while I haven't written in that in a couple months, I still write a lot, and that's something that I want to get back to too, is updating my blog.
Mm-hmm.
Because writing brings me a lot of joy. It always has ever since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And then I also, so we moved into a suburb right outside of Chicago. I always laugh because it's like a suburb, but it's not. I mean, we're so close to Chicago, or a couple blocks from Chicago. But I love, one thing I really, really love is old homes. And
Mm-hmm.
our suburb, all the homes were built like roughly between 1850 to 1950. So all the homes are old.
That's awesome.
And I've really gotten into old homes and learning about old homes. And I love going on walks in my neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
and just seeing the different architecture. And along with the walks, I've started to run too, because I want to be taking better care of myself in terms of exercises. And I'm not a big runner, but my husband and I were talking about it, and he likes to run, and I
Mm-hmm.
love to go on my walks in the neighborhood. So I said, okay, I'll commit to running Thursdays and Sundays. And so that's
That's
what I've
awesome.
been doing for me time. So it's podcasts in my ear and running around different
Yeah.
parts of this neighborhood.
What do you envision for holding both?
So with holding both, I actually made a change yesterday, to just go more in the place that I envision. So with holding both, what I used to offer was one-to-one sessions, group sessions, and then community. So just slowly building up, like slow and steady building up my Instagram community to connect other people. And then yesterday I announced that I'm no longer offering one-to-one sessions and
Mm-hmm.
focusing solely on building up my groups, because groups are something that I really, really enjoy, and I feel like they're beneficial for the women who get to connect. So building up group offerings to cover more women. So
Yeah.
like general, secondary, and fertility group is what I do right now. So I'm going to add another one of those, and then a group for those who are experiencing secondary infertility, trying to have a third child or beyond. Because I think when people think secondary infertility, they think trying to have a second child, but people can experience it having a third or fourth.
Yeah.
It's just history of a prior successful pregnancy to term, and then difficulty with the subsequent. And then having a group for those who are deciding to walk away from their secondary infertility journeys and embrace their lives with one child. And so I'm really excited about those additional group offerings, because I think that there's subsets of women in my community that might not feel like, as their journey has gone on, that the standard secondary infertility group applies to them anymore. So
That's amazing.
building up my groups and community. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so you give them, so that's like, it's like a choose your own adventure kind of thing, right? Like, so you have,
Yeah.
everyone comes in and they get a chance to meet and grow and learn about each other and all of that, and then it's sort of like, what path are you on? And we have a way to support you on that path,
Yeah.
whether you keep going, whether like you, again, you're in this asterisk of the third and fourth, or you're all done. I think the
Yeah.
all done piece is so valuable, because I think a lot of times what ends up happening is people, like, you just go and go and go, and then you decide you're done. And there's not, like, I don't, is there a place for people to have that, like, cessation of trying support? Like,
Right.
I don't feel like that's out there, even though,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
that's,
I do see it in the child-free communities
yeah.
where women, and I think that I've learned a lot from following those women, but I haven't seen it in secondary infertility, where you are trying to have a second and then it doesn't work out for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of it really comes down to the fertility interventions being so expensive that people reach a point, and then there's that grief there of like, we've spent all this money to try to have another, and there's that like loss and that grief. So I'm
Yeah.
really working on trying to build up and structure those groups before I officially launch them.
Yeah.
um, and one perspective that I think is really interesting too, it's more so for our, like, for child free. But I've been listening to some of those podcasts. Is that when I grew up, I had only one set of aunt and uncle, or one aunt and uncle out of all my aunts and uncles that had living children. And so I had an example growing up of individuals, all my aunts and uncles, aside from one, that had very rich and very joyful lives and very full lives without children. And so even though these women that I'm going to be serving they do have a child, I
Yeah.
think that there's a lot of overlap from people who are child free and people who are grieving a loss of what they thought that their life was going to look like. I think there's a lot of overlap and there's a lot of value there. And I think just observing that as a kid is
Mm-hmm.
something that I got to see that I don't think is as common as I thought it was when I was younger.
Right. Like that's your normal. It's so funny.
Hmm.
Like I've met with, this is still relatively new and it's still like working its way out into the internet world. But like the people that I've spoken to so far on here and, in learning sort of a little bit more about them, it's like there's such this huge, like I don't know that we necessarily realize the impact of the things that we saw. Like usually it's related to trauma, right? Like things that
Hmm.
are bad, things that are hard, things that are awful, all of that. Like there's definitely a through line that we can draw. But then when it comes to like that piece of it where it's like this is a positive thing and this was my normal, and so that's part of your story that you bring out there, where it's like you didn't grow up, if you grew up in a family where you have all these aunts and uncles and everyone has like 3 or 4 kids, all of this stuff, it's like there is a little bit of a like a grounding point where it's like, okay, I know people that don't have any children, and it's not everything is all bad and awful because you don't have children, and like all the things you're supposed to do with your life revolve around having children. So like
Yeah.
being able to connect those dots for people is awesome. But I also, like, I keep thinking like so many things that we end up doing especially at this sort of phase and stage of our life is like, oh yeah, when I was a kid tends to come into the
Hmm.
equation somewhere, and like that,
Hmm.
how much influence that has.
Yeah, I mean, wow, it's interesting that you say that too, because like something that I feel like informs holding both a lot is The Body Keeps Score. I'm sure you heard of that book,
Oh yeah.
The trauma. And I took a continuing ed course with the author of that, and it was so interesting.
Oh my god, I
Any
bet that was
OTs out there?
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like recorded and available still. But I yeah, I mean, I think seeing what you've observed in childhood and certain things as a good thing is huge. And I think it's cool that you put words to that. Because I do remember, especially growing up, my sisters and I were the only ones at like the Thanksgiving table because
Hmm.
my one set of cousins lived in California. And I would hear other families say like, "Oh, you guys don't have cousins at the holidays." Like, and to me, I felt like we had great experiences at the holidays. I love my aunt
Yeah.
and uncle so much, my grandparents on both sides so much. And yeah, I think it's invaluable for me to have seen what it's like for people to have very full lives, like I said, without living children.
Hmm.
And now I feel really lucky that I'm able to see that. And even now, like seeing into later adulthood, how amazing their lives are. So yeah,
Yeah,
I feel really fortunate.
you bring that into the mix. I just feel like people
Hmm.
find, you end up finding the thing, right? Like if you're, however it happens, and I think a lot of times, like when you just sort of start following that, like this is what lights me up and this is what makes me feel good. And although the topic itself, secondary infertility, I don't think makes anybody feel good,
No.
it's
Yeah.
like the opportunity to connect with other people and the opportunity to hold a space for people to have this makes me feel really good. And it and
Yeah.
it that's the thing that lights me up. And so I'm going to go in that direction, and then you pull in the pieces of your own self and your own history and your own journey. How did
Definitely.
how did it change, not how, but did it change for you when you had your second child? in terms of like, so you started.
I started holding both. So I started holding both after I
Okay.
had my second.
I was trying to
So
do
I
the math.
started it when my second was born in November 2021.
Okay.
And I think I had mentioned earlier in this interview that as my OT career, like as my motherhood journey evolved, my OT career has evolved as well.
Yeah.
And I was feeling this pull of what am I going to do when I go back to work? Is it going to be sustainable for me to have two young kids and be working full time as an
Yeah.
OT? And as all moms know, daycare costs are very expensive.
Ridiculous.
And my husband and I don't have family here. And we love going to visit our families in Michigan, but we don't have any family immediately here. It was our choice to move here for his schooling, and we like it here. But that does come with its downsides of not having like, someone to jump in and help us. So I knew that whether it was my choice or not, work was going to have to change for me. And so I joined a business course, and I didn't actually have an idea at the time of what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to be amongst women who were entrepreneurs. And so I signed up for that the week I went back from maternity leave, and then started learning about being an entrepreneur. And then the idea just evolved and fell into my lap at that point. So I launched Holding Both in July of 2022, and I
Okay.
had gone per diem in May of 2022. So going per diem freed up a little bit of space and a little bit of breathing room for me.
Hmm.
And I felt lucky that I was able to do that. I have a really, really supportive direct supervisor. And also kind of to backtrack to, I wanted to say she knew about me going through infertility and was so accommodating. So I know a lot of professions, people are flying under the radar and not wanting to tell their supervisors, and mine was always very accommodating and very supportive. So that was really great.
That's
So
amazing.
I felt very fortunate that she also was accommodating to me when I decided to go from being a full-time senior therapist to a per diem therapist. I felt very lucky.
How
Yeah.
did that
No.
how did that feel for you in terms of like going from this full-time position to the like when you start bringing in the business building aspect of it, because that's, I mean, that's a whole like talk about not knowing what's going to happen the next day or whatever, or it's like completely, you can try and lay everything out and all of that. Like how was that for you in terms of that pivot?
With the business aspect, well, the pivot was a little bit scary because I felt like I spent so much time building up my career as an occupational therapist full time. I was really proud that I got to the point where I was a senior therapist doing presentations and speaking at conferences and like grand rounds and that kind of thing. But I also knew that financially we could not afford to have two kids in full-time daycare. And there was a pull that I had, not to be completely a stay-at-home mom, because I knew we couldn't afford that, but I knew I
Hmm.
needed to just shift. And then with holding both, I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to start a business and I'm not sure how this is going to go, but I'm going to go with it and I'm going to be really consistent with it. And that's what I've done. And there is a woman that I met in my mastermind that shared a video that really resonates with me. And her name's Chloe from West Haven Coaching. And she shared a video that said entrepreneurship is like playing in a sandbox. And like it's an imperfect process at the beginning,
Yeah.
but you keep going and going. And all of her content really resonates with me, but that like specifically because wearing a bunch of hats, the motherhood hat, the trying to do stuff for holding both after bedtime and that kind of thing was
Hmm.
challenging at first, but I feel so passionate about it that I want to keep going.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think it's like,
Thank you.
you've got to have that like spark to go there, because it's true. Like, and I think that there's so much of a, when I was out on maternity leave with my first, I used to hang out with a group of moms, and we had our first, and for the most part, the ones that were home were teachers, therapists, like it's, women in these like helping professions, and it across the board was like it's not really super feasible to do like it used I feel like a long time ago it used to be like when you had like 3 or 4 kids, then it's like wow, the balance here is really off. But now, like, going into that one, it's that there's that piece of like, is this a doable thing? Like, because daycare is so expensive, because childcare is so expensive, because we don't live near families in the same way that we used to, and how does that all work? And then to layer on top, if you have someone that is going through the process of fertility treatments and going through secondary infertility and not having those supports and not having those pieces there, it's like it's just exponentially more pressure and more to deal with, and more to like it's more juggling. Like the plates aren't spinning at the same speed. You're not like,
Yeah.
hey, we have to get here and we have to do here and we have to do this. And it's just like, how does that change on a bigger level? Like, we can do the stuff in the moment, but how does that change on a bigger level where it's not like you have to think about your career when you want to do this other thing that you want to do? I mean, I like everything you said, I resonate with. Like, I had one kid. I never looked at childcare because I never toured a daycare facility,
Hmm.
not because, it's like I've got a money tree in my backyard, but because it just doesn't the math doesn't add up when it came to
Yeah.
the things that we're going to do. And I watched the people before me that were therapists, that were parents in the office, that had no vacation time because all of their vacation went for sick time when their kids were out of school. They had, you've got you can't stay late at work to finish up the thing, so you're just sort of always running from one fire to another. And so figuring out how to like get out ahead of that and say like, okay, I am going to start this business. And at the same time, like, yeah, you don't know what's going to happen, but you also, if you know what's going to happen and you know what's coming at you and it's not the thing that you want, like, why not take that leap? Why not start the business? Why not do the thing that, again, that like that lights you up on the inside? And OT pivot. Like, the more OTs that
Yeah.
you can get in different parts of the world, the better
No,
off.
I
Like,
agree with you.
I
Yeah,
just,
I
yeah.
mean, I have a PT friend who is a great friend of mine, and she, and I've known each other for almost 15 years, and she
Mhm.
asked me once, like, are you scared, to do this? Like, does it ever make you nervous to step away from full-time work and start something on your own? And my answer was like, heck yeah. But my
Mhm.
husband and we have had pretty much no choice but to be risk takers. And I know entrepreneurship, it's can be risky. But my husband is a PhD student, and he's been one like since before our first son was born. He's almost done with his dissertation. And that
That's
was part of
exciting.
the reason why, yeah, I'm really excited. So see, um, that was part of the reason too why I had to go back full time for so long, is that we were paying for this school as well as both of us were working. And
Mhm.
I think back to some of the things at the time where we were on such thin margins in terms of like our schedule and what we were doing and daycare, to like there's a specific day that just it makes me smile because it was like, wow, I'm proud of us, but like also this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Is that with IVF, there's a lot of doctor's appointments, like a lot. And there would be days where I'd have every other day I'd have to go get a blood draw, and it was in downtown Chicago. We have one car, like it's a very Chicago thing.
Yep.
And we were like looked at each other and said, okay, daycare drop off first or get your lab first. And he's like, okay, let's do this. I'm gonna drive you down. You're gonna get out, go up, run and get your blood draw, and I'll take 2 laps around the city, like a little part of the city, and then come pick you up. So it's like he went and did that, dropped me off. I got my blood work. My little son was in the back seat, and it's just
Yeah.
like it felt like such a teamwork thing. such an untraditional thing, but such a teamwork thing.
Yeah.
So I felt like that was a moment that was like really highlighted that chapter of our lives.
I love that. I love that. Like the idea of like, sometimes I think about like, I don't sail. But like when you see like those people that race those sailboats and they have like the harness on them and the boat is like, looks like it's going to tip over and they're like leaning out on the outside. And there's that moment of like, is this thing going to crash and this is all going to be awful? Or like, are we going to win this race? And I think about
Yeah.
like so much of starting a business, starting a family, all of those pieces are like, that's what's happening there. Like, that's what's coming at you is like, today, do we go in the water or today do we like carry on and make the turn? Like
Yeah. I feel like
it's a
that's a
juggle.
good visual representation for just modern motherhood in general. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. We're all
I
trying to
like
stay
that.
out of the water.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I love it. Well, I love what you're doing. I'm so excited that you came on because I think that the message of creating community and the way to support mothers and to take a skill set that you have and to put it out there in the world and also to not understate the importance of like it involves you having a hugely vulnerable thing out in the world. And so like that's a serious amount of grit and a serious amount of like passion that you have to have for something to say like, nobody stands up on stage and is like everything is perfect. It's like the people that they stand up and they say like I experienced this is what happened. This is how I work through it. These are the skills that I have. I want to help. I want to create this space. Like it's phenomenal. What you're doing is phenomenal. So I really hope that this thing goes and grows because people are able to connect in a way that works. So I just,
Thank you so much.
yeah, what you're doing is amazing. And I would love for you to tell everybody where they can find you, all of that info. And then I'll also put it in the show notes so people can link from there. But I would love to have you share that, please.
For sure. So my only social media I'm on right now is Instagram is where I hang out. So
Okay.
at Holding Both is my Instagram page. My website is www.holdingbothllc.com. And then I will be launching a secondary infertility podcast at the beginning of the year. So end of January.
Yay.
I'm looking forward to that. So
That's awesome. And if you have, yeah, I mean, if anyone that's listening is going through this, and I'm assuming that launching a podcast means that you are looking for people to be on it. So
yeah.
if people want to share, then to find you through via
Yeah.
email. Okay.
Absolutely. And my email is allie@holdingbothllc.com. And my goal of my podcast is going to be to elevate secondary infertility voices and make it more part of the infertility conversation. So very
awesome.
Excited. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for having me on. This is awesome.
Awesome. Well, the more OTs, the merrier. So thank you for coming on today.
Could not agree more.